Hello everybody, it's Patricia Warby of Alchemy Therapies, and today I'm going to talk about something that some of you may have experienced, some of you may have wondered about, and some of you may have no idea what I'm talking about. And it's one of the new innovative and slightly off the wall therapies that's come on stream in the last, say, 10 years or so. And no, it's not EMDR. I do a lot of talking about EMDR. This is something I've only myself tried in the last couple of weeks. And it's sometimes called dark therapy, sensory deprivation, or flotation. And they're all the same thing, basically. They're all variations of the same idea, which is if you take away the sensory input that we normally have, light, sound, and touch, and replace it with a sense of nothingness, then the brain has to kind of make sense of that. And in doing that, it often gets the space and the time to rejig itself, to kind of do the things that we would normally be doing if we were sleeping the right number of hours in darkness, which none of us do anymore, or very few of us, because we live in cities and we're light saturated and there's 24/7 input and there's our phones and all the paraphernalia of modern life. Now, float tanks have come on stream, as I say, fairly recently. And the idea is that you go into a room on your own with a float tank in the middle, which has a lid, which you can pull down. You can adjust the lighting inside, and you float in a stream of water. I should say it's a big pool of water in this cocoon-like tank. Now, it may seem a little bit like solitary confinement for some, and certainly if you are at all claustrophobic, as I am, I even find MRI scans quite difficult for that reason, then you may not wish to pull the lid down completely, and you may wish to keep some lights on. But certainly my experience was, it was certainly interesting. I did it for an hour. Normal sessions are an hour. And I would say probably I'd need to do it again. And now I know what to expect. I might get more out of it, but I found it very difficult to switch off. And I did try with the lights out, but I couldn't quite shut the lid entirely. For me, that felt like being in a coffin. For other people, it's the ideal, because then they can completely desensitize and cut off. And this is taking the world by storm at the moment. This is becoming very big in, say, celebrity cultures in the US. You know, everybody's doing it, that kind of thing. But what I wanted to go over was why it works, why we think it works. Because after all, what you're doing is you're floating, which is one thing, which means you don't have to expend any muscular energy keeping yourself afloat, which you would normally, because there's an extremely high salt concentration in the water. Now, it's usually Epsom salts, and Epsom salts have a very high level of magnesium in, and magnesium is very important for muscle relaxation, which is one of the reasons I think it works so well. So you're soaking in this pool of very, very salty water with no light and no sound for approximately 45 to 50 minutes, because obviously there's time around the session for changing. Now, the salt itself, the concentration is such that you start to absorb it into your skin because of osmosis, because the salt concentration is higher in the water around you than it is in your tissues. And so the salts move in and start to relax your muscles. As I say, you're very buoyant because of the high concentration. So you're just literally floating in quite a shallow, it's about 30 centimeters or a foot. So there's no danger of drowning. And the temperature is controlled to be exactly the same as your skin temperature. Okay, now that is also important, because then you don't notice the difference. And so you kind of feel like you're being bathed in just your own temperature. So there's no stimulus to the brain to work out if you're cold or you're hot, because you just feel the same as you normally do. So that's quite clever. Now, as I say, you can choose how you do it. But what we found with plenty of studies that have now been done is that results are astonishing, particularly for people who do it regularly. And if you do it once a week, for instance, and you have a high anxiety level, it seems that the reduction in anxiety is very highly significant. Now, this could be for several reasons. The first, I think, obviously, is the sensory deprivation. So the brain switches off and stops trying to function in its normal habitual way, what we call the default mode network, or DMN. And it kind of slows down after a while. The other thing, of course, is muscular tension is a really big feedback loop to your back brain telling you that you're under threat. If you're all tight because you're holding on to tension, the message to your back brain is you're under threat, because muscular tension is generally as a result of clenching and being prepared for something bad, like having to run or fight. So there is this feedback loop, which if you then interrupt that with muscular relaxation, the feedback obviously decreases, and so does your stress. And we use that in hypnotherapy, for instance, when we do graded sort of relaxation. But this is a very immediate and very physical response, and quite astonishing, as I say. People who have it go down 10 to 15 points on an anxiety scale, which is unheard of, really, in an hour's session. And it stays that way for the remainder of the day. That's what they found. So it isn't just a temporary blip, it lasts for quite a while. And if you start to have good results from this, a feeling of, serenity, then you're likely to want to go back and do it again. And that's what we're finding, is that people are making it a part of their sort of weekly self-care routine. But I really wanted to dive into what's happening neurologically. Okay, so we know we've got the physical effects, we've got the sensory deprivation, but what about what happens in interoceptive feedback? Now, interoception is the signal that the body gives to the brain through its various functions, say the breath or your heartbeat. And certainly when I did it, I suddenly became aware of my heartbeat, because you've got nothing else to listen to, and you're even with headphones on, which sometimes you can wear. I didn't have headphones, but you just become aware, everything's amplified, and you can really hear your own heartbeat, which can be a little strange at first. But what that's telling you, particularly when it slows down, because again, magnesium in the Epsom salts is really good for your heart, it starts to slow down, and therefore the sense of serenity, sense of peace starts to develop, because this is what the body is telling the brain through the nervous signals that are going into the back part of your brain. So that's kind of interoception. It's the term used for whether your body feels connected, if it feels safe, what's happening, those kind of feedback signals. And yes, the breath and the heart rate are highly linked anyway. We know that from what's called heart rate variability measurements, which you can do at any point and just investigate how the heart normally speeds up when you breathe in and slows down when you breathe out. And the ability of the heart to vary like that with the breath is actually a sign of good health. You don't want it to be like a metronome. You don't want your heart rate to be really regular. That's actually not a great thing. So these interoceptive signals are very important for feeding back a sense of well-being. And so that seems to be what's happening also in this state of sensory deprivation, because deprived of the normal kind of inputs of light and sound and touch, your brain is much more aware of what's going on internally. And again, this is sending you into a state, a hypnagogic state, a bit like when you're about to fall asleep or you go into hypnosis, where you're just incredibly relaxed. You're awake, but you're very, very relaxed. And the focus therefore moves from what's going on outside the body to what's going on inside the body. So we begin to notice suddenly what's happening inside, and where our limbs are in space, for instance. And that's proprioception. That's another term, which is really important, because it's important for our sense of balance to know where our limbs are. People who have proprioceptive difficulty often are unbalanced. They can't stand on one leg, for instance, or yoga is very difficult for them. They may be more prone to falls, which is something that happens as you age as well, because you don't always know how to rebalance yourself. So if we can build that capacity, it's also making us healthier physically. So there are many ways to restore this. As I've said, yoga, any form of body work, really, any form of balancing. But this is just another way that you might not have thought of. And I think the fact that these effects are so well observed neurologically, we can scan people's brains and show this default mode network, which is the set of neurons that are kind of communicating in a functional, some people call it the connectome. It's like functional networks that kind of talk to each other. And normally this is the sort of the mental chatter that happens all the time when we're not thinking about anything in particular, but we've got things running through our mind. That's your default mode network. It's incredibly important. And if floating decouples that default mode network, which it seems to do, if it takes it away from talking to other parts of your body, then you're just much more focused on what's going on, as I've said, with the more maintenance kinds of signals, the things, your digestion, your heart rate, and so on. So it's a sort of way of engendering a better balance in the body. And what we call balance is normally referred to as homeo or allostasis, depends what end of the spectrum you come from on that. Homeostasis is the old term, allostasis is the new term. It just means keeping things in balance in the body. So for instance, your blood chemistry or your digestion. And that all happens without you having to think about it normally. But it's very, very disrupted by stress. The stress response will uncouple that and make it much more difficult. And so that's why you get digestive difficulties when you're under stress, or you might get a skin eruption. You might get infections much more readily because your immune system isn't functioning. So anything that improves your homeostatic balance is largely going to benefit your all-round health. So it's a very interesting new technique, I guess. Longer term, like psychedelic therapy, which I'm also looking into at the moment, it seems to break down the barrier between the unconscious and conscious minds. Now, I'm doing a lot of research on this at the moment for the book that I'm currently writing, the Mind Medicine. And it seems like the unconscious, which we kind of know is located behind and underneath the cortex, so it's the back and midbrain areas. But according to some philosophers and physicists, it's actually a dissociated part of your brain. So it isn't available to conscious awareness. So you don't have that sort of linkage. You don't know that you're digesting, for instance. You can't track it. It just happens without conscious control. So anything that brings that into harmony, into a state of balance, is likely to make a huge difference to you. And it seems like that's what's going on, is it's breaking down the barrier so that you become more conscious of the things that are normally unconscious. So not only is it going to benefit your physical well-being and your mental well-being, but can also give you access to unbounded creativity, because creativity doesn't come from here. It doesn't come from thinking about stuff. In fact, that's where you will go down the rabbit hole, as I call it. Creativity is something that arises spontaneously from your back brain when you're really in a flow state, when you're really tuned in. Perhaps you're in alpha waves or possibly theta, not when you're in busy beta waves. That's unlikely to give you the answer to your problem. So this now seems to be doing what psychedelics also do, but in a perhaps more accessible way that doesn't require having to go on a retreat or do something extraordinary or something that maybe doesn't concur with your values. Something everybody, I think, would accept is a accessible treatment is to go and do a flotation for an hour. So it's now being recognized as something, it's got a little acronym, reduced environmental stimulation therapy, which of course the acronym is REST. So we could all do a lot more with a lot more rest, couldn't we? So I'm on the fence about it in terms of my personal experience, having tried it myself once. I didn't find it that relaxing. It could be the environment that I was in. It wasn't completely soundproof, the room I was in. I could hear, I was on an industrial estate, so it was, you could hear stuff around you. I could also see light coming in from under the door. And I knew there was an office next door, and I heard somebody come in and ask a query. And so, it wasn't the ideal environment perhaps. And I'm sure in a bigger center where you are, perhaps greeted properly and you have a rest and relaxation area initially, and maybe you're kind of guided a little bit more, that it could be a very powerful treatment. Anyway, I wanted to go over that today because it's something that I think could be of benefit to very many people. Now, I have to say it's not cheap. I don't know, for me, I think it was about 35, 40 pounds for the hour. That would be 50 or $60 US dollars. Where you are, it may vary. But having said that, compared to, say, a gym membership, I guess it's not that much more. So, and certainly compared to doing a ceremony somewhere like an ayahuasca or a magic mushroom ceremony, which are very expensive, but of course they're one-offs usually, maybe 2 or 3, but you don't go every week. So you have to sort of judge what works for you and what sounds attractive to you. But I thought I'd go over the fact that this functional connectivity is achievable in very many different ways, and that's just one of the ways that I've been investigating recently. So folks, thanks for listening. By the way, I really want to just once again say thank you, because the 1,000 subscribers that I hit last week was a milestone. I've had some great comments and feedback from that, including one of the authors of the book, Understanding Living Systems, which I did a couple of weeks ago. Raymond Noble got in touch and said he really enjoyed my summary of their book, which was really lovely. Just shows you that people are listening out there, and how wonderful to connect with one of the authors. I really didn't expect that. So it's always a joy. You do think when you're doing these videos, will anyone watch them? And I'm so glad there are people out there who are. So thanks again, and take care of yourselves, and speak to you soon. Find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk. Take care. Bye.